Before dawn, the sea was unnaturally quiet. The water in the Strait of Hormuz usually carried a constant rhythm, the deep growl of tanker engines, the metallic creak of cargo ships, the distant calls of radio operators speaking in half a dozen languages. But on this morning, something was wrong. Captain Riza Farhadi stood on the deck of a gray patrol vessel belonging to Iran. The wind tugged at his jacket as he stared across the narrow channel, where nearly a fifth of the world's oil normally flowed. Today, the tankers were gone. Only empty water stretched toward the horizon. Riza had served in the Navy for 22 years. He had watched storms roll across the Persian Gulf, had escorted tankers through tense stand-offs, and had seen diplomats argue on television about lines drawn across the sea. But this moment felt heavier than anything before it. Behind him, a young sailor whispered nervously, "Captain, do you think the world will really react?" Riza didn't answer immediately, because he knew the truth. If the strait stayed closed, the world would feel it everywhere. Thousands of kilometers away, in the sprawling port city of Karachi, diesel mechanic Imran Qureshi was wiping grease from his hands when his phone began vibrating nonstop. News alerts, oil shipping halted, tankers stranded, markets crashing. Imran stared at the screen, confused at first. His small workshop sat beside a busy trucking road where fuel tankers rolled past every hour. His entire livelihood depended on engines, pumps, and machines powered by fuel. His father had opened the shop 30 years earlier. Imran had inherited not just the business, but the dream that his children would never struggle the way his parents had. He muttered to himself, This can't affect us that quickly." But deep down he already felt the shadow spreading. Because when the Strait of Hormuz closes, the consequences don't stay at sea. They ripple across the entire planet. At nearly the same moment, in a quiet office tower in London, energy analyst Sarah Whitmore watched red numbers flood across global trading screens. Oil prices were climbing so fast that the charts looked like rockets. 40% in one morning, she whispered. Sarah had spent a decade studying global energy routes. To her, the strait was not just geography. It was the most fragile artery of the global economy. Every day, millions of barrels of oil passed through that narrow corridor between Iran and Oman. Saudi exports, Iraqi crude, gas shipments to Asia, all flowing through a channel only about 33 kilometers wide, and now it was blocked. Her colleague leaned over the desk. "If this lasts a week, we're in trouble." Sarah shook her head slowly. "If it lasts a month, the world changes." Back on the water, Captain Riza watched as military radar screens flickered with signals. Warships, drones, reconnaissance aircraft. The tension in the air felt electric. Riza wasn't a politician. He wasn't interested in speeches or ideology. He had joined the Navy because his father had been a fisherman lost in a storm when Riza was 12. The sea had taken his father, so Riza had dedicated his life to mastering it. But now the sea had become something else, a stage for the world's most dangerous chess game. He remembered the order that came hours earlier: hold position, enforce closure. It sounded simple, but Riza knew what it meant. Tankers would wait, prices would soar, countries would panic, and somewhere in distant capitals, powerful leaders would decide how far they were willing to push. Meanwhile, the consequences began spreading faster than anyone expected. In Imran's neighborhood in Karachi, fuel stations started forming long lines. Truck drivers shouted at each other. One yelled, prices are already rising. Another replied, if shipments stop, we're finished. Imran watched from across the street as tempers flared. A trucker named Bashir approached his workshop later that day. You fix engines, right? Imran nodded. My truck is fine, Bashir said quietly, but if diesel doubles, I won't be able to drive it. The fear in Bashir's voice was real, because oil was more than fuel. It was transportation, food supply, electricity, industry. When oil becomes scarce, entire economies tremble. Across the world in London, Sarah was explaining the crisis during a live television broadcast. The interviewer asked, "How serious is this situation?" Sarah paused before answering. "Imagine the global economy as a human body," she said calmly, "and the Strait of Hormuz is one of its major arteries." She leaned forward. If that artery closes, the entire system begins to suffer. She explained that nearly 20% of the world's oil supply normally pass through that single choke point. Countries like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, and United Arab Emirates relied on it to ship energy to the world. Major importers like China, India, Japan, and South Korea depended on that oil. If the closure continued, prices could skyrocket. Fuel costs could double. Air travel might shrink. Food prices could rise because transportation costs surge. And markets everywhere would feel the shock. But statistics alone didn't show the human side. That evening in Karachi, Imran sat at dinner with his wife Aisha and their 2 children. The electricity flickered. Aisha asked softly, "What's happening?" Imran hesitated. "Oil routes are blocked." She frowned. "Will it affect us?" He looked at his children. It might. Silence filled the room. Across the sea, Captain Riza felt a different kind of tension. Military radio channels buzzed with new reports. International naval fleets were moving closer. Among them were ships from the United States Navy. Riza knew those ships well. He had seen them during previous standoffs, professional, powerful, always watching. His second officer approached. "Captain, if they attempt to escort tankers through..." Riza finished the sentence quietly. Then the world holds its breath. Days passed. Oil prices continued climbing. Governments held emergency meetings. Stock markets trembled. But the deeper story unfolded in the lives of ordinary people. Truck drivers, factory workers, airline employees, fishermen, and sailors like Riza. Imran's workshop began seeing fewer trucks. Fuel shortages meant fewer deliveries, less business, less money. One night he sat outside his shop with Bashir, the truck driver. Bashir sighed. "My father always told me the world's problems start far away, but end up at our door." Imran nodded slowly. "And sometimes we never see them coming." Meanwhile, Sarah in London barely slept. Her reports were now watched by millions. But what kept her awake wasn't the data. It was the possibility of escalation, because closing the strait was not just an economic move. It was a geopolitical signal, and history had shown how easily such signals could spiral. Back on the patrol vessel, Captain Riza stared again at the silent water. For the first time in days, he saw a massive oil tanker slowly approaching the edge of the restricted zone. It stopped, waiting. The ship's captain likely had orders too. Orders from companies, governments, insurers, all calculating risk. The world had reached a pause. Riza whispered to himself, "So this is what pressure feels like." The tanker eventually turned away, and the sea returned to silence. But something else had changed. People everywhere now understood how fragile the system was. One narrow passage, one geopolitical decision, and the consequences touched every life. Weeks later, negotiations began quietly. Diplomats met, naval tensions eased, and eventually the first tanker cautiously passed again through the Strait of Hormuz. When Captain Riza saw it on the horizon, he exhaled deeply, not because the crisis was fully over, but because the world had stepped back from a dangerous edge. In Karachi, Imran watched fuel trucks return to the highways. His business slowly recovered. One evening, Bashir returned with his truck. "Looks like we survived," Bashir joked. Imran smiled. "Yes, but we learned something." Across the world, Sarah finished her final report on the crisis. She concluded with a simple sentence: "The world is more connected than we think." Because what happens in a narrow stretch of water between nations can echo through cities, homes, and hearts across the entire planet. And perhaps the greatest lesson of the Hormuz crisis wasn't about oil or ships or politics. It was about how deeply humanity's future is shared. One sea, one planet, one fragile system, and the hope that when the pressure rises, wisdom rises with it. Globe ship fuel.